Give it in front of the...
Oh, yeah, you're right, in front of the mic. Here. Okay. Hey, everybody, how's it going? Hope you're having a lovely day. So today I am here with Marvin Winsfeld, the primary contributor to something called the MicroG project. Google is a company that offers us virtually everything for free in exchange for access to our data. And there are several studies going over the degree to which Google tracks you if you use a standard stock Android phone. Marvin's project seeks to reduce that. He is the latest recipient of a Futo Legendary Grant. The whole idea behind the Futo Legendary Grants is to provide no strings attached money to people who have been doing excellent work in the area of giving freedom and sovereignty back to users of their hardware and their software. Marvin, thank you so much for taking the time. I really appreciate it.
Hi, thanks, Bruce.
So this is, I'm going to show on screen a snapshot from a Google location upload over here. And this is just a little bit of the information that gets shared regardless of whether you want it to be shared. And it actually not only reports your location, not only the timestamp of your location, but also Google's confidence as to whether or not you're walking, running, in a car, on a bike, or on public transportation. This is just one of the many pieces of information that likely creep out a lot of people when it comes to the entire concept of what their phone is doing. Can you give us an idea of how it is your project seeks to reduce the degree to which Google is able to see what people are doing on their Android phone?
Okay, so first of all, MicroG is basically a complete rewrite from scratch of all the concepts and functionality provided by Google Play Services. Google Play Services is the main big chunk of Google code running on every Android device. And in that big chunk, there's all the largest part of the tracking that you can see documented, like in this you've just seen. And MicroG is basically just a complete rewrite of that. So we're basically providing the same thing, but we make it new and open source, and thereby we can always see what the original implementation of Google does. And then obviously we will not add this functionality of location tracking or sending data to Google that they don't need to have when doing the rewrite. And because it's also completely open source, everyone can just see what exactly is still sent. And yeah, that's what MicroG provides, and how we make sure that no data is sent that you do not want to be sent. Of course, we cannot ensure that there's never something sent to Google, because some of the features provided by Google Play Services by nature require that data is sent to Google. But we minimize it to the extent possible, and also by making it open source, also make it very transparent what is actually being sent to Google.
Yeah, because I don't think a lot of people are aware that even though the Android open source project is an open source operating system, that there are a lot of components that Google puts into the stock Android that most people get on their phones that is necessary for so many applications to function. So you don't need to use Android with Google's additional proprietary software. But if you don't, your banking applications won't work, Uber and Lyft don't work, like stuff, certain food ordering applications won't work. There's a lot that just fundamentally breaks if you don't have that in there. Now, from that snapshot of the Google location upload, again, it includes the timestamp along with the degree of confidence that you're walking or in a car or public transport. And I think a lot of people think that that's creepy, that Google doesn't need to know whether you're walking or on a bike or a car at specific times of the day. So what does MicroG do specifically to defend against that type of data collection? Like, for instance, if a user were to use Google Maps with location services turned on when they have MicroG on the device versus stock, Samsung S20 that I get from Samsung.
Okay, so when you have Google Maps, so that's already probably not the best example, because you're running Google Maps, so Google will definitely learn something about your location. And if you have navigation on, then they will learn where you want to go and where you're driving and so on. So that's by nature of the application Google Maps, and it's to some degree something they need to know, because they want to display on the map where you are. So they need to know where you are, of course. And besides that, there shouldn't be anything sent to Google when using MicroG, because so for all this location information reporting and this kind of what activity you're doing, all of this is part of Play services, and which is provided through a service called Location Reporting API, which, or as you can guess, already does what it does. The name says, right? So and in MicroG we just do not provide this service. So if you run Google Maps, it will try to connect to that service, and the service is not provided in MicroG, so it will just not do that part. So you already have naturally much less tracking if you are using MicroG than if you're using the original Play services in this example. Even though Google still can obviously get your location, and if you're signing into Google Maps, and it will still be connected to your Google account or Google profile, just because they have it from the Google Maps, but it's less data at least.
Yeah, like one of the insidious things is even if you're not using Google Maps, that location data is still being reported. So if I'm using, let's say, a device that has MicroG instead of Google Play services and everything else running on it, and I use organic maps, this is not going to be getting reported to Google the same way it would be on a stock Samsung S20.
Yes, exactly. So basically, there will be no report at all to Google. When you do use something that's called network-based location, which is the ability of your phone to locate you not based on GPS, but based on Wi-Fi, cell towers, and other information, then MicroG will use a third-party service to resolve that location information if you choose to do so. And you can also select which third-party service you want to use. So there's basically a community repository of modules where you can select which source you want to use. You can use Mozilla, which is a popular open database. You can also use the database of Apple, which is, of course, it's still one of the big companies, but their database is much more open and less tracking, so you do not have to give them any identifier when requesting data from there, so they cannot actually correlate multiple requests, and thereby there's some good amount of privacy here as well compared to the Google API.
Now, one of the reasons that I've heard for the reason that it's done this way, and that this is that if we know your location at every point in time, when you actually request your location, it'll be faster. And I did try on a device with MicroG using location services for a mapping app, and it was surprisingly fast. It found my location very fast. I didn't try it, right next to a device that used stock Android to A/B test it. But is there really a serious performance hit to this approach where you're only getting location data when the user asks for it versus trying to constantly track it all the time?
Oh, there is. So especially the GPS module works based on having exact timestamps, and if the GPS module was used recently, then it still does have the exact timestamp. It can know where exactly satellites are and in which frequencies they are sending and stuff like that. So GPS is much faster if it was turned on recently. For network-based location, it doesn't make any difference at all. And also, if you have network-based location, that information can already be fed into the GPS module, so that the GPS module has an idea of where it is, which will also speed up the GPS location fixing a lot. So that's already possible also with MicroG, the same way it's possible in Google Play services. Yeah, so the location speed you see in MicroG should be typically similar to what you see in original Play services, except where the network-based location does not work because the quality of the open data sources like Mozilla is just not as good as the proprietary ones.
Okay, so I want to read one set of piece. I want to read one paragraph from this study before I ask this question. So in it says, while AdSense and AdWords collect data on mobile devices, their ability to get user information on mobile devices is limited since mobile apps do not share cookie data between them, an isolation technique known as sandboxing, which makes it hard for advertisers to track user behavior across mobile applications. To address this issue, as Google sees it, Google and other companies use mobile ad libraries like AdMob that are integrated into the applications by their developers for serving ads in mobile apps. These libraries compile and run with the apps and send to Google data that is specific to the app to which they belong, including GPS locations, device make, device model, when apps have the appropriate permissions. As observed through the data traffic analysis and confirmed through Google's own developer web pages, such libraries can also send user personal data, such as age and gender, to Google whenever app developers explicitly pass these values to the library. So there are examples of Google sending information data, such as a Google advertising ID for targeted mobile ads, along with the user's Google account, serial number, IMEI, in order to fingerprint them and associate data collected by advertising software with their actual identity. And Google themselves state, and I quote, mobile advertising identifier may get de-anonymized through data sent to Google by Android. So I see with MicroG, you can indeed log into a Google account to use an application like YouTube or YouTube Studio and have it work. How does MicroG stop this level of data collection for a normal user who's still going to log into an application like YouTube the moment they turn on their phone?
Okay, so basically, when you sign into a Google account and you give an application like YouTube basically allow it to use your Google account, then obviously the data can anything you do inside the YouTube app or while the YouTube app is running will be basically linked to your Google account, and that also obviously works across applications. So if you have different applications using the Google account, that can work as well. The other thing that you mentioned, the Google advertising ID, if you're using MicroG, then the advertising ID service, which would provide the advertising ID to the application, also just does not work. So in that case, applications that work purely based on the Google advertisement ID would just have no way to track you across applications.
So device ID, Google advertising ID for targeted mobile ads, IMEI, and all of that is not going to be collected when using MicroG for those particular applications?
So applications can still request the serial number or IMEI of the device. That's hardware identifiers that every application can request, but there isn't permission attached to that on modern Android versions. So if as long as you do not grant that permission, the application will not get access to those device identifiers. Inside MicroG, we obviously also don't use any device identifiers when we communicate with Google. We will always, in case the API or the service or the Google server side normally asked us to provide such a serial number or IMEI, we'll just generate a fake number and use that instead.
That's beautiful. Okay, so but my next question. A lot of applications do require Google Play services in order to function. And from my understanding, MicroG is pretending that it's Google Play services to these applications that require it. And this requires signature spoofing. How do you achieve this, and how do you view the security reduction, if any security reduction is actually present in this approach to the way that you're doing it?
Mm-hmm. Okay, so signature spoofing is basically just the idea that when an application wants to ask the operating system for the signing key that signed another application, the operating system would not return the actual signature, but return something else. So every Android application is always signed using the developer's private key, and this signature ensures certain integrity functionality, but also has certain security properties, like when you update an application, only the original developer that had developed the original application can provide an update, and the operating system will not allow to install an update coming from someone else. So that ensures that whatever data you have stored within your application will not get accessible by a third party just by giving you a fraudulent update or something. There's also a number of other security features that rely on the signature. So what signature spoofing does is it does fake the signature when it's requested by third-party applications. So that means that all these security features built into Android that rely on the signature just work as is, because the Android operating system is not a third-party application in the sense of the signature spoofing. So they will just use the original signature and not use the signature spoofing. So that's why the security impact of signature spoofing is really, really limited. There's obviously, to some degree, some security impact, because you could argue that applications that use Google Play services do so intentionally, so they want their data to be sent to Google. And MicroG, by replacing Google, does basically something that the application did not want, and that is to some degree breaking the security model of Android, because it's intended that if an application wants to send data to Google, it will go to Google and will not be blocked or not be modified by a third party, and that's what we're doing. So if you want to argue that there is a security impact, then obviously there is, but I get the feeling that people that install MicroG actually exactly want that so-called security impact.
Now, I've heard people say things like, with signature spoofing, an attacker can create a modified update of an app and steal the application's private data, which you and others have contested as false. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to clear the air here. Why is a statement like that false and misleading?
Yeah,
and also, why do you think somebody would get that impression?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the signature is used for exactly that updating. So if someone would assume that the signature spoofing just allows to change the signature in any way and tricks the whole operating system, then this indeed would have been possible, but that's not how the signature spoofing that is typically used with MicroG works. There was or is some let's call it extension or modification of the Android operating system that actually allows exactly that, so that you can update an application with missing signature, and doing so would allow to replace Google Play services with MicroG on a normal device. And I think that some people might have used this and basically think that this is the same as the signature spoofing that MicroG is intended to be used with, but that's something different. And that's why I guess some people confuse those two things. And also a lot of people do not really understand things like signatures and security. So people just think that if signatures are spoofed, then it might affect everything, when it actually does not.
Now, there's a worry that with each new Android version, MicroG is going to have to be updated by you in order to stop the application from breaking. And there's also this fear that Google may someday crack down on the spoofing method. Is this a concern? And if so, how do you deal with that concern? Because I can imagine if I was Google and I wanted, to get all of this data, and I wanted the Google advertising ID and everything else, and somebody found a way around it by spoofing my signature, that I would look for a way to get around that as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, an Android update typically does not mean that MicroG needs to be updated, because what we are looking for is Play services updates. New Android versions often include updates of Play services, but often enough they also are not significant at all. So that it's not related directly to the Android version, it's related to the Play services version. And of course, Play services could be updated to make things incompatible with MicroG. But the way Play services works is basically that the applications include some sort of library that will connect to the service provided by Google. And this library is embedded into the applications. So whenever Google wants to update this library, they need to update all applications, or to be precise, the developer of the application needs to do this update. And if they wanted to do something incompatible, it would take a lot of time. And by the time that this incompatible update reached a lot of applications, it would already have been possible for MicroG to basically keep up with that. So there's not a lot of ways for Google to really do that in a proper and long-lasting way. And with respect to signature spoofing, I don't think that Google is really looking into that blocking signature spoofing, because signature spoofing by concept is not something that is harmful or in any way bad for them, and something similar is or has already been possible without or before MicroG, and is a long-standing possible. So I don't think there's any real intent for Google to specifically attack signature spoofing. So yeah, I don't think that there's any need to or really you would need to worry about Google intentionally breaking this. Of course, they will break things because they just add new features into Play services or improve things. Well, improve probably means add more tracking, and that could in the end be incompatible with how MicroG does things. And then applications using these new features will maybe break. So that's something that happens, but it is it does not happen too often, and it's always something that we can basically fix.
Okay, so now I've read people say that MicroG must be run as a system app, and that's the SE Linux domain that it would have to be run as a privileged user rather than the untrusted app domain. Now, this seems to be a misconception because certain Android open source project operating systems are shipping. One sec. Yeah, Peter, you're gonna have to edit that. Sorry. All right, so it's been said that MicroG must be run in the system app SE Linux domain as a privileged user rather than the untrusted app domain. And this seems to be a misconception since certain Android open source projects ship MicroG running in the system app security Linux domain rather than the untrusted app. But it doesn't have to be run as a privileged user. Can you tell us what functionality is gained, if any, by running MicroG as a privileged app versus an untrusted app? And what are the security benefits of running it as an untrusted app?
Okay, so basically, there's a few features that MicroG has that only work when the application is run as a system app or a more privileged app, and none of these are critical. And I can tell you that I am running MicroG on my own phone as untrusted app, so it is perfectly fine and possible to do that. And I do that because it makes things easier for me during development, but it's perfectly fine. And what we get when running as a system app are really small features. So, for example, if an application requests location using the so-called fused location service API, then when using MicroG, basically the application will ask MicroG to ask the operating system for the current location, for the GPS location in that case. And to the operating system, it would then look as if it was MicroG asking for the location. And when we run as a privileged app, we can tell the operating system it was actually this application asking for the location, and that will result in these system settings correctly displaying which applications requested the location recently. So it's not really critical. It's also not very important, but this is just as an example where it does have some advantages to install as a system app. It also makes some things easier, especially in with respect to battery optimizations, where basically with every new Android version there are small changes to the battery optimization system, and often these changes need adjustments to MicroG. But if you're running as a system app, it's also fine to just keep with the old version because system apps are typically not very much restricted when it comes to battery.
Yeah, like I'm using an operating system that uses a different implementation of this because I have a phone with Calyx OS and I have a phone with Graphene OS. And on the Graphene OS phone, the Google Play Services is running as an untrusted app. I just have to give it a unrestricted battery access in order for a lot of my push notifications to work otherwise. So what identifiers and cookies are stripped when using MicroG for location services, if any?
So as I mentioned, when you use location services with MicroG, you will decide on which service you want to use, Mozilla or Apple, or there's also the possibility to just download a database of basically cell towers and do all the stuff directly on your phone. There's no way actually to use the Google server for location because nobody implemented that, because obviously people installing MicroG are not that interested in connecting Google there. So I don't think that question makes a lot of sense, given that we are not sending data to Google at all. So there's also no identifiers or cookies sent. But of course, if you are connecting to Mozilla or Apple, then all these requests will be done without any cookies or personal identifiers, except for the Mozilla API requiring us to send the device model, which is not very personal data for statistical reasons.
Okay, so I've heard MicroG is open source, but that it runs proprietary Google binaries. If this is true, what proprietary Google binaries are run through MicroG, if any, and what do they do?
Okay, so there's a functionality in Google Play Services which is called Safetynet. It's a feature that basically allows applications to make sure that the device is an original Google-powered device, and this works by or this API includes the requirement to download some small code from the Google server and execute it. And the functionality for this is implemented in MicroG because, as mentioned, some applications, especially things like banking apps or some games, also require it. It's optional and disabled by default. But if you enable it, it will download the same code the same way as the original Play Services does. And obviously, because we are executing this Google code, there could be tracking in this code. We know from the past that this code did not do anything that would normally qualify as tracking, because it's also just executed for a very short time, and basically you're just there for a second, and then you will not see it running for more than a few hours again. So there's also not a lot of opportunity for, let's say, advanced tracking things. But of course, the behavior of this code can change at any time. So there's no way to make sure it will not change because of the way the code is done, and that means that you must be aware that when enabling this, that there could be side effects. But also in MicroG, there's actually there's a screen where you can enable this. There's also a warning just explaining exactly that.
All right, so I've read that MicroG, quote, allows leaks between applications. What could this be referring to, and what is, if at all, the basis for that type of claim?
I cannot tell what the people meant when they said that. I can only guess, of course, and to some degree, there is probably a way for data to be sent to MicroG and then requested from another application, so there can be data shared between applications. I don't think we have that as an intentional feature, but as an application providing services to other applications, that's something that just can happen. But also the same can happen when you run the original Google Play services. And in the case of original Google Play services, there is actually also intentional functionality to do that. And if there's two applications that want to, communicate data between each other, then typically they can just also do that without using MicroG. So I don't see what exactly is meant by that. The one thing that could be is also when you do use MicroG and you use push notifications with MicroG, then you can the information of the push notification is logged to the developer debug log of Android, and if you have, for example, root permissions or give root permissions to a third-party application, it can read those logs and thereby read the basically the content of the notifications of the push notifications that are sent to the applications. The idea of push notifications is that they do not include personal data. But I can tell you from experience that a lot of apps do not do that correctly and actually have personal data in there. So that could be seen as a risk, which is actually not applying to the original Play service because it does not log this in this way. We do that for debugging purposes because everything we need to be able to debug, whereas Google has a large developer team and testing team. We to some degree have to rely on end users, so end users get a little bit more of debugging features in MicroG than they would get in Play services. But yeah, besides that, I have no idea what could be meant.
Yeah. Are there any transport security or security checks that are done by Google Play services and framework that are or aren't done by MicroG?
I wouldn't know what. So let's say, for example, if you use MicroG and thereby typically have signature spoofing, then other applications could do the same signature spoofing technique to spoof MicroG, so that MicroG would think that an application is actually another application. Technically possible. I don't think that, I mean, that would be some kind of security check if you want to, but I wouldn't know what you can actually do with that. And transport security, you also mentioned that. So there's the common saying that MicroG does not have certificate panning on the TLS connections. It does to Google server, and that's correct. For MicroG, it also wouldn't be really possible to do that, because to do that, you would have to know in advance when there will be a new certificate being used on a production server, and we do not know in advance when Google is going to do that. So there's no real way for us to do certificate panning. But there also is no certificate pinning in Google Play services, or at least it's not effective. I've seen that claim that they do it, but I can tell from experience that they don't. And that I know that because I'm actually, intercepting the network traffic, which would not have been possible if they had proper certificate pinning. So yeah, I don't think that there's any significant change here. And if there was, then of course, then it would be good to know, because then obviously we would want to add that to MicroG as well, if it is a security feature.
So when it comes to notifications, I understand the benefit for battery life and having one service running that handles notifications for many apps. But the downsides of this approach is that almost every application is configured to use Google servers for their notifications. Do you think we ran in the wrong direction by having almost every application decide that they are going to use Google for push notifications, like in giving them that much control for the savings in battery life?
To some degree, yes. To some degree, no. So first, of course, it is true that having a lot of connections for each application just to get push notifications, that would be bad for the battery. So it is a good idea to some degree centralize that. But on the other hand, if done properly, one could have done it in a way where it's basically there is one service, like Google push notification service on each device. But the user can select to choose a different one, and it would not have, and the developers would not make it wouldn't make it different for app developers. So they would automatically be compatible with every possible push notification provider. But obviously that was never an intent for Google, and they decided how they want to build the push notification infrastructure, how it is on Android, and they build it such that it's good for them. But there are at least ideas like of alternative push notification system that run a more federated infrastructure. So you can have your own server, or you can use a third-party server, or you can use the server of your friend for push notification. But all applications would still use those one service that you decided on your device which you want to use. So that system exists. It's just not the default one on Android. So we basically cannot rely on it being used, and application developers cannot rely on it existing, actually. So that's kind of like never going to really roll out if it's never going to arrive on a device, because the stock device does not have it.
So what inspired you to create this project? Because this gives so many people so much more control over their device. It gives them a little bit of their privacy back. And there was nothing like this that I knew of prior to hearing about this project. So like, what inspired you to do this?
So I was basically I had the same problem that you described just in the beginning of this video. Basically, I had apps that I wanted to use that didn't run because I had my Android device, or AOSP, back in the days running CyanogenMod without installing the Google apps. And back then there was no Google Play services, and stuff was all different, but the issue already existed. And then I was looking into what can I do to make these apps work that I want to use, and that's basically how I started developing this whole thing. And over time, it grew dramatically. But yeah, it basically was. I started because I had the problem myself, and now I'm also obviously looking into issues that others have. And if someone reports that the specific app does not work, then I'm also looking into these apps, even if I'm not interested in them. But yeah, that was the original reason for me to start the project.
So when we spoke prior to issuing the grant, you had said that there's a really steep learning curve to doing this type of development, that there's a very small number of people working on it, to the point that you have camera applications that have more developers than some of the actual operating systems or MicroG itself. What are the skill sets and knowledge bases required to engage in this type of work?
So I think the main issue is that the only really good developer documentation on AOSP is in Google's hands, and basically they are not properly releasing stuff. So they're giving that to under NDA to hardware manufacturers to some degree, but probably not even all of it. And besides that, there is no real good documentation. And documenting such a huge amount of code would just be like a very, very large amount of work. So every person that open source contributor that does something in AOSP or related to AOSP, or just learn their part that they have to for the stuff that they do, and they or just look into the source code themselves, basically reverse engineering from the source code how the operating system works. And yeah, that's a lot of work. And if the person doing that doesn't do the extra mile of actually also documenting what they found out, then there's still no documentation. And because it's already a lot of work, then also doing the documentation on top is another big amount of work. So I think that is a big problem. And for play services and things around play services, and MicroG then specifically also, it's even worse because there's even less documentation there, and even less people doing things related to that. And Google is not even giving out documentation to manufacturers because they don't need to, because it's not basically something that the manufacturers get in touch with. They just deploy what Google gives them on the device, and they shouldn't touch it in any way. So yeah, there's not even any documentation available there, and there's probably some internal documentation at Google, but nobody has it. So lack of documentation really makes it basically learning everything on your own, and you have to learn a lot before you actually get to do something meaningful here.
So this sounds like our equivalent of trying to fix a motherboard with no schematic when you have to learn it all from scratch each time.
Yeah.
That sounds like a large hurdle. So I see that if people want to give patronage to this project, they can go to liberapay.com/microg, which I'll link down below. And there's also microg.org. Do you have any other places where people could find you if they either want to contribute financially or they want to contribute code and get involved with the project?
Mm-hmm. So the whole project is currently hosted on GitHub, which arguably is not the perfect place because it's Microsoft, but that's where it is right now. But yeah, so if you want to do any code contribution, then probably going there is already a good start. Looking into issues there, or just looking into the code itself already would probably make a huge difference, because a lot of people or many people wouldn't even be able to do that. And yeah, then if you also want to get in touch directly with me, you can reach me on by email. I'm also on Mastodon or XMPP, whatever. Yeah.
I was surprised to hear that this seems like a lot of work, because you're one of the primary contributors of code, contributing over 80% of the code to this, and you have to do this all without documentation. But you also have other projects that you're working on as well that you're passionate about. Can you tell us about some of those?
Yeah. So the other thing that I'm working on a lot is basically called the Dino. It's an XMPP client. XMPP is a federated instant messaging system, similar to how email works with any provider. XMPP, everyone can also have their own provider, and it was popular like 15 years ago, and then the few big companies took over all the messaging things, but the protocol still exists and is still being developed, all by open source, or mostly by open source people. There's like a big variety of clients and servers and so on, and I'm working on one of them, and I'm also working on the XMPP Standards Foundation's Technical Council, which is where basically we develop and the standard so that it can be on par with what is needed in the modern world.
Wow. So you keep very busy.
Yeah.
Okay, so last question here. Do you think that Google will ever simply have a little toggle switch in Android where if you click the toggle switch, all this information is not going to be reported back to them, essentially rendering your project obsolete and useless? Or do you think that is never coming?
So first, even if Google was to do that, I don't think that MicroG would be useless, because it's not only about the privacy aspect, it's also about all the other aspects of being an open source free software project, which means we can replace and change any component on our desire and not as Google pleases. So there's still value in there, even if Google was to suddenly become super privacy friendly, but I doubt that's going to happen.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you very much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. And everybody here, I'm sure, really appreciates the work that you continue to do to help people get back a little bit of control over their technology. And for all of those who are listening, if you're interested in this Legendary Grants program, I'll include a link down below. If you email grants@futo.org, we read through this. Again, not everybody gets accepted into it, but what's the worst that could happen? Worst that can happen, you get a no. Thank you so much for joining me today, and thank you so much for taking the time. And above all, thank you so much for all your contributions to this amazing project.
Thanks for having me.
All right. You have a good day.
Bye.